They say the quietest afternoons can hold the loudest surprises. I thought I was in for nothing more than a warm cup of tea and the creak of my old porch swing that day. But when my husband's friend pulled into the driveway, his expression carried the kind of weight that makes your heart skip. What he shared with me didn't just stir the air, it stirred something in me I hadn't realized was waiting. Before I tell you, let me know in the comments which city you're watching from. I love seeing where these stories travel, from big cities to small towns. It makes me feel like we're all sitting together on this very porch. It was late afternoon, the sun still hanging above the trees in that golden way that makes everything look softer, almost forgiving. I was rocking gently on the porch swing, listening to the cicadas hum, when I heard the crunch of gravel under tires. I knew the sound of that old truck. It belonged to Mark, my husband's longtime friend. He had been in and out of our lives for decades, the kind of man you wave to across the street, but rarely sit down and talk with. Mark stepped out, slower than usual, and I noticed the way he straightened his back before looking toward me. His boots hit the ground with a heaviness, not just of steps, but of thoughts. I set down my tea, brushing my palms against the fabric of my skirt, and gave him a smile that I hoped would ease whatever he was carrying. "Afternoon," I called out. He nodded, pulling off his cap and running a hand through his hair, which was more salt than pepper now. "Afternoon," he echoed, though his voice carried a gravelly undertone, like words trapped behind it. "Jim's not home," I said gently, though he probably already guessed. He went into town to pick up supplies. Mark's eyes lingered on me a little longer than usual, like he was measuring whether he should walk up the steps or turn back to his truck. After a pause, he made his choice and came closer. The wood creaked beneath his boots as he stepped onto the porch, and the swing shifted slightly as if sensing the change in the air. "Mind if I sit?" he asked. I gestured to the chair across from me. "Of course not." He lowered himself into the chair with a sigh that carried more than just tired muscles. For a while we sat in silence, letting the chorus of cicadas fill the spaces between us. I watched as he stared at his hands, rough and calloused, twisting his cap as though it might unravel the knot in his chest. Finally, he spoke. "I didn't plan on stopping here. I was just driving, but something told me to pull in." There was something about his tone that made me straighten, sensing this wasn't going to be a casual visit. His eyes met mine, and for the first time in years, I noticed the lines of the corners, etched by both laughter and sorrow. "I've been carrying something for a long time," he continued, "and I think it's time I said it out loud, to someone who'll listen." The words hung in the humid air, heavier than the scent of cut grass. I felt a pang of both curiosity and caution. This wasn't the kind of conversation I expected on a summer evening. Still, there was something in his voice, earnest, almost fragile, that stirred my instinct to listen. "You can tell me," I said quietly, leaning forward just enough to let him know he had my full attention. Mark looked out toward the horizon, as if searching for courage in the setting sun. His jaw tightened before he finally spoke again. "I've spent most of my life working, fixing, doing. But somewhere along the way, I stopped talking. Stopped letting anyone see what's really going on inside." His words pulled at me, not just because of what he was saying, but because of the raw honesty in them. There's a kind of truth people keep hidden until it's too heavy to carry alone, and I could tell this was one of those moments. The breeze shifted, lifting the hem of my sleeve, and I realized I was holding my breath. He turned back toward me, his eyes steady now. "Your husband has always been there for me, but I've never told him certain things. I don't know if I ever could. And yet, sitting here, it feels like maybe I can tell you." I felt a tremor inside me, not fear, but the kind of anticipation that comes when you know you're about to cross into a deeper place with someone. The porch, the swing, the late afternoon, all of it faded behind the weight of his words. "Go on," I said softly, my voice barely above a whisper. And with that, Mark leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees, and began to unravel the truth he had held inside for far too long. He didn't rush. He spoke like a man easing a knot out of a rope, careful not to make it tighter. He told me he'd spent years showing up for everyone else, on job sites, at church work days, when a neighbor's fence blew down, but he hadn't shown up for himself in a long time. Then he said the word that changed the way I saw him. Lonely. Not the kind of lonely that company cures, but the kind that grows when you carry something unsaid for so many years, it starts to feel like a second spine. He glanced at his hands again. I could see the small scars, the faint white line by his thumb, the nicks along his knuckles that come from years of work, and one or two things a man would rather not name. He drew a breath. "I quit drinking 12 years ago," he said. "Didn't tell Jim. Didn't tell anybody except the folks in those folding chairs who understood what I meant without me having to say much. I should have told him, but I was ashamed I'd get that far." His voice held steady, but there was a flicker of something like surprise in his eyes, as if the words sounded truer out loud than they had in his head. I let the porch do the talking for a moment. The rope of the swing creaked, the wood settled, a dog barked 3 houses down, and somewhere a neighbor shut a car door. I didn't say I was proud of him, though I was. I didn't tell him I'd suspected something once, years ago, when he came by to borrow our ladder and couldn't meet my eyes. Back then I handed him a paper cup of coffee and said, "Come back in one piece, will you?" It had been small talk to me. To him today it wasn't. He rubbed the rim of his cap. "My sponsor passed this morning. Stroke. He used to say, 'Living honest beats dying polite.' I've been dying polite for a long time. That's why I turned into the drive." I felt that sentence land in the space behind my ribs. Dying polite. I thought of the ways I'd made myself smaller for the sake of smooth days, of the times I told myself that wanting more conversation, more looking in the eyes, more being seen was too much to ask. I thought of how often I'd set the table, poured the tea, and kept the stories I wanted to tell tucked away, because dinner was ready, and there was weather to discuss, and the evening news would be on soon. "What do you need to say to him?" I asked. He looked past me, toward the line of oaks that marked the edge of our yard. That I lied, in little ways. That when he thought I was avoiding weekend work because of my back, it was really because Saturdays used to be the hardest day to stay sober. That I borrowed a few bills from the coffee can in his shop 12 years ago and slipped them back the day after, but it wasn't mine to touch. That I kept his friendship in a glass case like something I didn't know how to clean without breaking. He swallowed hard. My heart thudded once, deep and slow. "He won't throw you away for telling the truth," I said. "He'll likely wish you told him sooner, but he won't throw you away." Mark nodded, like he'd already had that argument with himself and wanted to hear it from someone else anyway. He exhaled through his nose. "There's one more thing, and I don't want it to be taken wrong." A part of me braced, not because I was afraid of him, but because I knew the shape of certain confessions and how easily they can tick a porch into a place it shouldn't go. He must have read that in my posture, because he shook his head and lifted a palm. "It's respect," he said. "That's the thing I haven't said. Respect for you. I've watched you hold your family together with quiet hands. You look people in the eye and actually hear them. There were days when I was white-knuckling it, and I'd think of you humming while you swept this porch, and I'd tell myself to make it through the hour. Not like that, but because you made steady look possible. The tightness in my chest loosened and turned into something else, warm and uneasy in a good way, like remembering a song I loved and hadn't played for years. He wasn't asking for anything from me. He wasn't pushing a line. He was putting a piece of himself in my keeping and trusting I'd set it down gently. "Thank you for saying it exactly like that," I said, "and for coming here before the words got heavy again." He nodded, and the porch fell into a soft hush that felt earned. I noticed the light change, how the sun had slipped just enough to toss long stripes across the steps. A breeze carried the cut grass smell from down the block and made the wind chimes tangle notes together like an old hymn that nobody sings perfectly but everyone knows. "You know," I said after a while, "your sentence about dying polite. It hit me. I've been doing a bit of that myself." He tilted his head, not prying but open. I surprised myself by continuing. "I stopped painting. I used to set up on Sundays by the north window where the light is kind in the morning. Then life got busy, and it felt silly, like a child's habit, but no one asked me to stop. I just folded it up to make room for being useful." Mark's mouth softened at the corners. "Useful's good," he said. "Being alive is better." We both laughed at that, easy and short, and it felt like putting a fresh plank down on an old floor, the kind of small fix that keeps a house from listing. He leaned forward, elbows on his knees again. "I want to make it right with Jim, not just in saying the things, but in showing up different. If that means he's mad a while, I'll stand there and let the wind hit my face. And I'll stand with you," I said before I had time to talk myself out of it. "On the porch if you wanted to be here. In the shop if that's better. Wherever honesty sounds most like itself." He looked at me with a gratitude that made me look away for a second. I reached for my tea, then set it down. There are moments when your hand moves before your thoughts have a chance to tidy themselves, and this was one of them. I set my palm on the arm of his chair, not quite touching his hand, just close enough that the air between skin and skin felt like a bridge you could cross or not. He didn't move toward me. I didn't move closer. We let the small nearness exist exactly as it was, a promise that this conversation was safe. "Can I ask one more thing?" he said. "You can ask anything," I answered, and meant it. "When you tell yourself you'll start painting again," he asked, "what time of day do you picture?" I smiled, a little caught off guard by the simplicity of the question. "Morning, when the house is quiet and the light forgives mistakes." "Then tomorrow morning," he said, "put the table by that north window. I'll drive over here tomorrow afternoon. If the canvas is blank, I won't say a word. If there's color on it, I'll say that living honest looks good on you." I felt tears sting, fast and foolish and fine. I blinked them back because they weren't the point, but I let one slide because maybe they were. "All right," I said, "tomorrow." And that's when I heard it, the low familiar rumble of Jim's truck on the county road, then the turn signals click, then the small lift in the engine that meant he'd hit the dip by our mailbox a little too fast, like he always did. Our silence shifted, not broken, but braced. Mark stood, not in a scramble but with a resolve that looked new on him and natural all at once. He settled his cap back on his head and smoothed the brim with a thumb. I stood too, my hand steadying the swing as it swayed. We weren't conspirators. We weren't anything that needed a name. We were two people who had decided to stop dying polite on a porch where the world could see us if it cared to look. The truck door shut. Footsteps on gravel. A pause. Jim always paused for a beat before taking the steps, as if the day were a coat he needed to shrug from his shoulders before crossing into home. "You ready?" I asked, even though the question was mostly for myself. "I am," Mark said. The screen door creaked open from the inside, as if the house itself wanted to make room. I felt my spine lengthen, the way it does when you decide to stand in your whole height. The evening gathered its colors around us, dusk blue and porch light gold, and I realized the change had already happened. Not in what Mark would say next, not in how Jim might react, but in the way I would carry my own voice from here on out. The porch light flickered on as if the house knew it was needed, casting a soft glow that made the air between us look gentler than the moment felt. Jim stepped onto the porch with the familiar thud of boots, the smell of engine oil and dust trailing him like a second skin. His eyes moved from me to Mark, and I could tell by the way his brows knit together that he felt something different in the air, even if he didn't yet know what it was. "Didn't expect to see you here," Jim said, his voice steady but curious. Mark shifted his cap in his hands, not hiding, not fidgeting, just steadying himself. "I needed to talk to you," he said, "and I thought maybe now was as good a time as any." Jim leaned against the porch post, arms crossed. For a moment, I thought he might wave it off, tell Mark to come back another day. But he didn't. He just gave a small nod, the kind that meant he was listening. The words came slowly at first. Mark told him about the years he spent fighting himself, about the quiet battles no one saw. He admitted the lies, the excuses about his back, the times he borrowed what wasn't his. He didn't make them sound smaller than they were, and he didn't dress them up either. He just told the truth, one piece at a time. Jim's face didn't move much, but I could feel the weight of his listening. Every so often he glanced toward me, as though to steady himself with the fact that I was there too, a witness to something he hadn't asked for but needed to hear. When Mark finally stopped, the silence that followed was long and full. The cicadas had quieted, replaced by the chirp of crickets, and the swing creaked once as I shifted. I half expected Jim to lash out or walk away. Instead, he let out a breath that sounded like it had been trapped for years. "You should have told me," he said simply. "I know," Mark answered. "I was afraid." Jim's jaw tightened, but then he nodded once. "Afraid or not, you're here now. That's something." The moment wasn't neat, but it was honest. No one hugged, no one cried, no promises were made on the spot. But something had shifted. A truth had been let out into the open air, and it wasn't going back in. I watched both men, realizing that sometimes change doesn't arrive like a storm. It comes like a slow breeze, steady enough to turn the weather if you let it. And as I sat there between them, I felt the same breeze touch me too, reminding me that honesty, even in small steps, was the only thing that made the porch light glow as warmly as it did that night. Would you like me to make Chapter 4 the closing reflection and emotional wrap-up, carrying that same calm but strong tone?